Hello, welcome back to Alfred's Basic Adult Piano Course Lesson Book Level 1. This video is Lesson 24, which covers page 29 in our book. Warm up using C, G7, and F chords. And once again, When the Saints Go Marching In. So the difference between this lesson and our other lesson 2 videos ago, in that lesson, When the Saints Go Marching In, you had the melody in the right hand and the chords in the left hand. Today it's reversed. You're going to have your melody in the left hand and the chords in the right hand. So sometimes you may encounter pieces of music where melody's in the left hand. It's not that common. Most of the time it's in the right hand. But sometimes it's nice to hear a melody in the left hand, maybe just for variety's sake. So at the top of the page, we've got the warm-up using C, G7, and F chords. So let's review these chords in our right hand. So you're at your C position. Your first chord is the C chord. C, E, and G. 1, 3, and 5 is our fingering. So make sure that chord is nice and strong, nice and even. Once that's accomplished, let's look at the G7 chord. Your thumb moves down to B. Your fourth fingers should be on F already. 5 is also on G. Okay, so again, make sure that chord is nice and strong and solid. If it's not, if it's unbalanced, if you don't hear all 3 notes, work on that, work on balancing the fingers until you get that clear sound. We go back to our C chord, and then our newer chords, our F chord. So your thumb is going to stay on middle C. Your third and fifth finger both move over a note to F and A. So that's a little different. You want to make sure you don't use that fifth finger over there. Whoops. I meant to do that. Yeah. See, I can't even do it. So this is why that 3 needs to be on the F. It's just a whole lot easier with that fingering. And lastly, you're back to your C chord. So work on these chords individually. Before you play the entire warm-up, I strongly suggest going from the C chord to the G7. Make sure you can do that. Just back and forth. When that feels good and even, work on your C chord to your F chord. And just go back and forth between those. Now, in this exercise and in When the Saints Go Marching In, you're actually never going to go from the G7 to the F chord. It's always from C to G7 back to C. It's always C to F back to C. Okay? Once you feel good with all those chords individually and then going back and forth between one and another, then you can go through and do the entire warm-up. So when you do the entire warm-up, remember, you don't have to be fast. You can be as slow as you need to, because our goal, as always, is not only accuracy, but evenness in our rhythm. So here we go from the very beginning. All quarter notes until the very end when you have the whole note. Now, if you can't play it that fast, that's okay. Go even slower. If you go at a really slow tempo and you're still struggling between measures to get to the next chord, just back up and practice again, going back and forth between whatever 2 chords is giving you the trouble. Okay? So definitely spend some time on that before you get into When the Saints Go Marching In. When you feel good about it, and you can play it at a pretty good pace. Now we'll look at the right hand on When the Saints Go Marching In. So that's where your chords are, in the right hand. You still have the pickup measure at the very beginning of the piece. So that's beats 2, 3, and 4 that you're going to rest for in the right hand. The next measure, you're resting on beat 1, and then the C chord is on beats 2, 3, 4, and then 1 on the next measure. Very important that you rest on beats 2, 3, and 4 on that measure, as well as 1 on your last measure, and then come in again with beats 2, 3, 4, and 1. Now we're on the second line, rest for 2, 3, 4. Resting on beat 1 in the second measure, hit the C chord again on beat 2, rest on 3, chord on 4, rest on 1, chord, 3, chord, rest on 1. Now you have a G7 chord, 2, 3, 4, third line on beat 1. Again, rest on beats 2, 3, 4. Next measure, rest on 1. You're back to a C chord on beat 2. Rest on 3, chord on 4, rest on 1, chord, 3, chord. Now, this is the only time we have the F chord in the entire piece. And you have a half rest for beats 1 and 2. The chord comes in on beats 3, 4, and then on the bottom, hold it for 2 counts, rest on beats 3 and 4. Back to your C chord, rest on beat 1, chord on 2, rest, 4, rest, G7 chord, rest, and then finally rest back to your C chord. Notice our last measure is beat 1. When you repeat to the very beginning, your left hand will continue on beats 2, 3, and 4. So the spots that the right hand probably needs to work on, I would say one of the tougher spots is the bottom line, going from measures 2 and 3. Measure 2, you're on the C chord on beats 2 and 4. And normally you have the C chord for, several measures in a row. But here at the bottom line, you only have it for one measure, and then you got to go to your G7 on that next measure. So you don't have as much time like you did previously in the piece. And then after the G7, you're back to the C chord. Now, that's not too difficult maybe by itself. But when you add the left hand to it, then it gets a little more busy. That G7 might just sneak up on you. So make sure you're really prepared for that. You might even take a pencil and circle that really big on the page. Okay, I'm going to go straight to the left hand now. The left hand, as I said earlier, is our melody. And it's no different than what you played in the right hand on the previous piece as well. The only difference is you're reading these notes in the bass clef, and they're going to be a little bit lower in sound since they're down here and not up here. Okay, so your left hand comes in on beats 2, 3, and 4 because of our pickup measure. So you can count off a 1 silently, and then come in on 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, so then our G there is held for 5 counts because it's tied into the next measure. Then you do the same idea again. So on the third measure, playing the same exact thing. Once again, tied for 5 counts into the first measure of the second line. And once again on beat 2, the same pattern. Now in the second measure, you have half notes. Now, in those 2 measures, that's outlining a C chord in your left hand. So what I mean by that is you're playing a G to an E to a C, back to an E. Those 3 notes are in the C chord. So keep that in mind. You're outlining a C chord, which means you're not playing an F with your second finger or a D with your fourth finger. You're going to skip those fingers in those 2 measures. When you get to the last measure on the second line, there's a D, and that's tied, so a total of 5 counts going into the third line. You're going to rest on beat 2, come in with your E on beat 3, D on beat 4, and then down to C for a half note, another half note on beats 3 and 4. Next measure, E, and then G. So those 2 measures are also outlining a C chord as well. A little bit different than the line above. It's just C, C, E, and G. But just like the line above, they're half notes, so 2 beats each. When you get to the last measure of the third line, you got a G on beat 1, and you go to F on beat 2. Now the F is a dotted half note, so it's beats 2, 3, and 4, and it's tied into the bottom line. It's tied to a half note, which is an additional 2 beats. So the F really is being held for a total of 5 counts. So when you enter the F, it's 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, move to the E on beat 3. Then you have F on beat 4. Next measure is G for 2 counts. Skip down to E for 2 counts. D for 2, D again for 2, and lastly C for a total of 5 counts. It's tied into the last measure, which is beat 1. And then when you repeat it, back at the beginning, beat 2, 3, 4, 1. All right? So it's really not that different than the previous version of When the Saints. Like I said, the hands are simply reversed. Easier said than done, though, right? All right, so here we go. I'm going to put the hands together for you, going very slowly from the beginning. I'll give us a little count off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And then we repeat, and it just keeps on going with no pause. Okay, so some tips when you're putting the hands together. Again, it's not that different than the other version. But just as a review, so your left hand is playing first by itself. When you get to the G, then your right hand plays. When the right hand's done on beat 1, then the left hand plays. And this is true of just about the entire piece. The hands will not play ever at the exact same time. It's basically back and forth. The left hand starts, then the right hand goes, then the left hand, then the right hand. The only overlapping that happens is the left hand often will hold a note while the right hand plays, but you're never playing both at the same time. So keep that in mind when it comes to coordinating this. On the third measure on the top line, or second full measure, when the left hand plays that C on beat 2, your right hand should be resting. So you're here on beat 1. When your left hand goes down on the C, observe the rest in the right hand. We should have silence. You don't want this to happen, so we shouldn't be holding on to the C chord in the right hand. So observe all your rests when you put the hands together. They're generally in the right hand. When you get to the second line, second measure, be careful here. There is this back and forth. Left hand, right hand, left hand, right hand. You don't want this to happen. You see what I did there? I lifted my half notes in the left hand. They need to stay down. So down on beat 1, hold it for the right hand as well on beat 2. Beat 3, it's only the left hand. Hold it down for the right hand on beat 4. So that layering, you want to observe that layering. When you get to the third line, first measure, you're here on beat 1, both hands rest on beat 2. that's an important rest. That's the only time that happens in the entire piece. So let's take advantage of that. And then your left hand comes in on 3, 4, 1. Again, when you get to the bottom line, second measure, you're doing a C chord here in the right hand. Be prepared for this next measure to go to the G7. That might sneak up on you. So practice those two measures if that occurs. And then, like I said, at the very end, you want to observe the repeat. Without a pause, go straight into the beginning. So when you've learned this version, and you should have already learned the previous version, it says at the bottom of this page here, what you can do is flip back to page 27. So page 27, remember your melody is in the right hand, chords in the left hand. When you get to the bottom of the page, instead of taking the repeat back to the beginning, flip the page to page 29 and play it the second time this way. This will be a really good test of coordination. You got so used to one version where you play it all in the right hand, but can you flip the page and flip like a switch your hands? Now your left hand has melody and your right hand has chords. This will also be a lot of fun to master because it's really cool to hear that melody in one octave and then hear it flipped in another octave. So musically, it's pretty fun too. As far as flipping that page, you might want to make a photocopy of one of those pages, because the challenge, of course, is if I'm here at the end of page 27, it's really hard to keep going without fumbling that page, taking that pause. It's going to sound really good if you can just without any pause. That'll sound really nice, whether it's a slow tempo or a fast tempo. And you know what I'm going to say, go for the slow tempo first. Once you get comfortable slow, work it up fast. So if you have to take a pause because there's no way to make a photocopy, that's all right. It's not the end of the world. But it'll sound that much better, more fluid, of course, if you can get a second page over there and just go from one to the other. So that is a pretty big project at this point. That is a nice goal to reach. If you can play both versions of When the Saints Go Marching In, you're in really, really good shape. So master this newer version on page 29 first, go back, review page 27, and then see if you can put them together. Once you've accomplished that, we move on to the next lesson. All right, I'll see you there.